On this channel, we cover a lot of 3D printing, and for good reason. The technology is really diverse and it can be used for a wide range of applications. Back in 2014, when I got my first 3D printer, I had no idea that it would become the focal point of my channel and such a central point of my life. That 3D printer was the first fabrication tool that I'd ever gotten my hands on, with the exception of some Dremel tools that I used to use to cut up cases back when I was doing case mods for game consoles. And because of 3D printing, I was also introduced to some other really awesome technology. Some of those are CNCs, laser cutters, and even vacuum formers. Now, as awesome as 3D printing is, it's not always the correct tool for the job. Now, without a doubt, out of those technologies that I listed, 3D printing is the one that I have the most experience with. I've dabbled a little bit around with CNC and laser cutters on this channel, but I am a complete novice with CNC. I think that CNC machines are awesome, especially the ability to work with materials that you can't use on a 3D printer, and being able to CNC out some parts and combine those with 3D printed parts that maybe you couldn't mill out to allow you to make some really unique projects. For the most part, when you compare CNC machines to 3D printers, CNCs are typically a lot more expensive. Even a budget CNC machine can cost you $1,000 to $2,000 when you compare that to something like the Ender 3 3D printer, which is just $200. Now, 3 years ago, I did review or at least attempt to build a low-cost CNC machine that I think at the time was between $150 to $200, and I had a terrible experience with it. The instructions were really poor, the machine just wasn't built very well, and ultimately I ended up getting a little tiny star to be able to be engraved, and that was the extent of my experience with that low-cost CNC machine. Well, 3D printers have evolved a ton over the last 3 years, and I figured that maybe desktop CNC machines have followed in suit. And Alex over at Super Make Something has been milling out some really awesome projects on his desktop CNC from FoxAlien. I will place a link to his channel in the description down below. You should definitely go follow him. And when FoxAlien reached out to me and asked if I wanted to review or test out that exact same desktop CNC machine, I jumped on it. So in today's video, we're going to take a look at the FoxAlien 3018 SE. We're going to take a look at the machine specs, what my experience was with receiving the machine, assembling the machine, any kind of calibration, and of course, we're going to carve out some things. This video is coming to you from someone, again, that is very new with CNC machines, so it's aimed more at someone that might want to dip their toes in the water with the technology or hasn't done any CNCing themselves. There's quite a bit to cover, so without further ado, let's get right into today's video. So starting off, let's take a look at the specs for this machine. The 3018 has a work area of 278 by 157 by 33 millimeters, which is quite a bit larger than some of the other small desktop CNC machines and definitely larger than the one that I used 3 years ago. It comes standard with a 60 watt, 8,000 RPM spindle, and it's compatible with standard gerbil software. The machine is primarily constructed using a combination of aluminum as well as some acrylic. Other than on the bottom side of the machine is completely encased in 5 large pieces of acrylic, which is awesome because it keeps all of the dust and debris inside of the machine while you're running a job. The enclosure was one of the things that I really liked about the machine, considering the one that I had previously used did not have an enclosure. It also came with an included Z-probe, which is something that is awesome. Basically, when you are starting a job, you need to tell the machine where the starting point is, and the X and the Y isn't so difficult to line up, but for the Z or the cutter, having to jog that down every time to your material can be tedious. So with the probe, you just set it in place, press a button, it goes down, and it zeroes the Z or the height of your material. Along with that, it comes with some clamps that can be used to hold down your stock material. Aside from those things, there's a huge amount of accessories that you can get with this if you decide you want to. One of the things that I opted for was a small touchscreen, which will allow me to run this machine without needing a dedicated computer tethered to it. For someone that is a beginner like me, I was also very thankful for the giant red kill button on the front right side of this machine. So now let's talk about assembly, because for me that was a huge one, and that was my biggest fail point with the machine that I attempted to assemble 3 years ago that spent many days of frustration really not getting anywhere. So this machine came in a box, in another box, surrounded by foam. I was really impressed by how well it was packaged, which is always really nice to see. One thing that I was really surprised about, pleasantly surprised about, was that a lot of this machine actually comes already assembled. You primarily have like your top gantry area, your bottom gantry, and then some bolts to assemble the two to each other. So assembly process kind of just looks like mounting the top frame to the bottom frame and putting on the acrylic panels, as well as mounting the board on the back and plugging in all of the different cables for things like the end stop, the spindle, the emergency kill button, and as well as the Z probe. I didn't time myself, but if I had to guess, the assembly time for the 3018 for myself was somewhere between 2 to 3 hours. Now, I do think that I could have gone quicker, but I took my time. I was getting footage of the build process, so of course that adds quite a bit of time just trying to get different angles of what the assembly process looks like. One thing that I was incredibly impressed with was the build guide or the build manual that came with this machine. It came with a beautiful large booklet that had step-by-step photos of what you needed to do that were very well labeled, they were clear, and they were concise, and there was not a single time when I was building this that I didn't know what I was supposed to be doing or what I was going to be doing next. Even for the wiring, there is a gorgeous picture that shows all the wiring. I believe I took a photo of it because I was so impressed. But this blew my mind as far as the assembly process that I had experienced 3 years ago. I would say that anybody can definitely get away with assembling one of these regardless of whether you have built something like a 3D printer or have much knack for building. It's just not a very difficult build at all. So as far as packaging goes, as far as assembly goes, it definitely got my thumbs up. Once I assembled the machine, I was ready to run my first job. The machine did come with 10 of these small little engraving bits. They're all the same exact ones, so it doesn't matter which one you go with, but I installed it in there, then took the flash drive, headed over to the computer to check out what was all on there. I did find a PDF version of the build guide. I also found the Candle software, which is the gerbil control software. You'll use that to send jobs to the machine. You'll use that to control the machine if you don't have the little touch screen that I got with mine, and you'll use that to kind of monitor jobs as they are running. As well, I did see a bunch of test files that were already pre-sliced, so that was nice. There's already some stuff on there that is ready to go. So I took one of the little pieces of material that the machine came with. It's like a really condensed cardboard, I would say. So I stuck that in the machine, clamped it down, and then I started off with just manually leveling the CNC machine, or manually jogging it. And I guess it's not leveling, it's not a 3D printer, but manually jogging it to the home position. So basically from my computer, I just made it go to the corner of the material that I wanted it to start at, which was the bottom left based off of the sliced files. And I homed it, and then similar to a 3D printer, I took a piece of paper as I was slowly lowering the engraving bit to the material and kind of moved it back and forth until I could feel the bottom of the engraving bit touching the top of the paper, and I hit 0. So that lets the software know that this is the starting point as far as the X, Y, and the Z for this job. Then I went ahead and ran the first job, which was a small little, really quick, probably 30-second engraving that just said FoxAlien in, I mean, it wasn't bigger than an inch by like a 1/4 inch. And then I followed it up with a slightly larger test engrave, which was still relatively small, but it was just of 2 gears, and they both turned out fine. There was the cardboard, or the condensed cardboard, doesn't exactly do the best job of showing the detail in the engrave. It kind of tears a bit as it's engraving. So I was at least happy to see though that I had installed things clearly the correct way and that everything seemed to be functioning accordingly. So once I had done the test carves, I actually had to move the machine out of the way because I needed to record something for a different project, and because I have very limited space in my living room and this is the designated recording area, I moved this off to the side, and then a few days later I moved it back. During that time I did some thinking about what I maybe wanted to engrave next, and I had a couple of these small little sample tiles that I got from Home Depot probably a year or two ago, which are kind of like to check for maybe if you're looking to get laminate flooring so you can take it home and match it up with your paint or whatever. And I decided that I wanted to take Modbot and kind of make a cool script version of it and try to engrave that into the laminate flooring. So I went over to Easel, which Easel is actually Inventable software. It's a free, there's a free and a paid version, but you don't have to use the paid version to do most of the basic engravings. And FoxAlien did have a instructional video on how to quickly set up a profile for this machine within Easel. So I went ahead and followed along with that. That was no problem. I created a vector file of, again, Modbot with some cool script text that I had found online. And then I tested out the Z probe, where it's really similar to how you home it when you're doing the manual thing. So you still manually jog the X and you manually jog the Y to line it up. But for the Z, you just shove the little aluminum block underneath the engraver. You clip the clip onto the actual engraving bit and then tell it to do the Z probe. It goes down, touches the top of the aluminum block, and then it knows exactly where the top surface of your material is going to be. So I sliced the file in Easel, I exported the G-code to the included SD card that came with the screen, and I went over to the screen to run the job, and that is where my trouble started. Over the next couple days, I went into super troubleshooting mode. Basically what was happening is the job would start, it would start engraving, and anywhere between the first 10 to 20 seconds, the machine would just freeze. So it wouldn't respond to me, the touchscreen wouldn't do anything, it wouldn't move in the X or the Y or the Z. The spindle would just stay on, and every single time I had to hit the kill switch. And so I went around trying all sorts of different things. Again, initially I was thinking it's probably me because the test files had worked fine, and I could not figure it out. I tried using Fusion 360 to generate the G-code. I checked all of the wiring. I tried manual leveling. I tried using my Mac to see if it was something with the software. And I then ended up reaching out to FoxAlien saying, hey, you know, do we have any idea of what might be going on? And ultimately, I figured out what the issue was, and it was definitely a facepalm moment. So over here where the power supply is, I happen to have a nearly identical looking power supply, but not the correct power supply. And of course, it, again, looks like the same thing, had the same plug on the end, but I actually plugged the incorrect power supply into this, this is a first for me. I don't think I've done this before, but essentially what was going on is it would start fine because it was close as far as the power requirements, but as the job would start and the spindle was ramping up, it just either, based off of the output, it either was getting too much power, so it was shutting down into an error state, or it wasn't getting enough power, which was causing it to freeze. But ultimately, when I plugged in the correct power supply, my problem was solved. So it's incredible that I spent a couple of days trying to figure it out when it literally was just an incorrect power supply. So, and the funny thing as well is, I don't know if you can see this, but I started a while back labeling, so like you can see this, like it says Elegoo Mars. I started labeling all of my power supplies to prevent this from happening. And of course, I did not label this one particular power supply. And if I had, this would not have happened. So sometimes, like, just as a reminder, the answer is something so obvious and right in front of your face, and this was definitely one of those cases. So once I figured that out, I ran the initial file that I had exported, the initial G-code, and it completed without any issues. So that was really a relief and kind of like an aha moment that I had done things correctly. And again, it was just that power supply. And so I ran a few jobs on different laminate tiles that I had. I had some black acrylic around that I also tried running a couple jobs on, and it did fine on the acrylic. The biggest issue I ran into was that while it was engraving it was kind of melting the acrylic, which I'm going to attribute to myself, not knowing the correct speeds or the correct plunge. Well, I guess it only plunged once because it was a single engraving, but it had to do with me just not having the correct speeds or the correct end mill on the actual machine. But it did definitely turn out and look kind of cool, but it didn't have the smooth finish that I was hoping for all over it, at least. And then I also did a little bit more engraving on the included kind of condensed cardboard stuff, which of course turned out fine. It looks fuzzy because of the hairs or the fibers that hold it together. When the engraver goes on it, it kind of splits it up and makes it look fuzzy. But every other job that I ran on this turned out fine and followed the instructions that I had created over an easel when I sent them over to the machine. The 3018 SE seems to be a solid little machine, and if you are someone that just wants to dip your toes into the world of CNC, I think that it's a great option. The fact that it is small, doesn't take up a ton of space, it's fully enclosed makes it really nice, and if you don't want to go all out and get a larger form factor CNC machine, or you just don't need that, and you only plan on working with the materials that it's compatible with, which is again things like woods, acrylics. If you want to prototype your own PCBs, that's pretty cool. That's a really awesome actual use case for this desktop CNC machine. I do think that if you decided you wanted to replace some of the acrylic parts on the side panels with aluminum, that you actually could get away with doing some more soft metals on this machine, but again, that's definitely more of an advanced operation. Really, the most difficult aspect of this machine isn't unique to this machine itself, but just CNCs in general. With 3D printing, slicers and material profiles for the most part are second nature to me, while with a CNC machine, things like the RPM, the depth per pass, the plunge rate, the different end mills, there's flat and ball end mills, there's different flute end mills, just all the different materials that you might want to work with in different settings. It's a lot to learn when you are initially getting started. It's definitely something that I think that there's quite a bit of learning curve jumping over from 3D printing to a CNC machine. Certainly if you don't have any experience with either of the two, but at least if you've been 3D printing, you're familiar with the hardware as far as, like in this case, some NEMA 17 motors. You maybe have looked at G-code before, which I do think will give you a slight edge over someone that just hasn't used either of the technologies previously. I will say that it is no different really than anything else. When I got into 3D printing in 2014, I had no idea what I was doing. There wasn't beautiful slicers, there wasn't built-in profiles, nobody knew what they were doing as far as bed adhesion goes. So it's not like it's any different than learning something new, but I do think that 3D printing has evolved to the point where the learning curve of getting into it is so much easier than it was even just 6 years ago. While CNC machines, I do think that with a software like Easel, it's certainly easier to understand and get involved with, but there's the learning curve between the two technologies definitely seems like to me CNC machines would be a bit steeper than something like a 3D printer. With that being said, I am really excited to learn more about the technology because this is something I would really like to incorporate into some of my own personal projects using, like I stated earlier, a combination of 3D printing for maybe some of the more organic geometries and something like the CNC machine for either housings or just parts that I need to be a little bit more precise or a little bit tougher. So the combination of the two is something I really look forward to doing. It might be a while before I'm able to use this machine to its full capability. Again, reason being that this is my living room and I don't have a set space for it, but you better believe that once I've got a place for this, I will absolutely be trying it out with some things like soft metals down the road, but that will not be anytime soon. The manufacturer does also have some awesome accessories depending on what your use case is. We did cover that there is a touchscreen, which is something I highly recommend if you don't want to have a computer or a laptop around every time you want to use the machine. There's also an upgraded spindle at 300 watts, so if you are planning on working maybe with some more soft metals, or if that's kind of like one of your primary goals, having that more powerful spindle could potentially help you. There's a low profile vice grip, which will help you with clamping down smaller pieces of stock material, as well as a flip jig, which will allow you to do two-sided milling. Flip jigs are pretty awesome. I haven't really used them much myself because it's more of an advanced operation, but essentially I believe it would allow you to do 2.5D milling. So I've seen people take, and there's videos online, I might be able to show you guys one, but you can take an STL file and generate a toolpath for it. Well, STL files are 3D, so you'd have a tough time if you clamped your material down milling out the entire thing. Well, with a flip jig, you can put your stock material inside of it, mill out 1/2, and it keeps it lined up when you flip the part over, and so then you can mill out the other half of your part, which again will allow you to do some like 3-dimensional milling, which is pretty awesome. With the current price point of around $330, the 3018 SE is an awesome little desktop CNC to, again, dip your toes into the water and get more familiar with this technology. This doesn't even necessarily have to be the end-all machine. You know, kind of like a lot of people end up getting a Crowley Ender 3, they learn that they really like this and maybe they want to go with a bigger machine or a more powerful machine, or, you know, has whatever features. I can really see this kind of being a gateway CNC for a lot of different people. Compared to my experience with the low-cost CNC machine that I tested out 3 years ago, this has been a night and day difference. The inclusion of the instructions, having it fully enclosed, Z-probe, and being able to use it with Easel makes it a hell of a lot easier to at least get up and running and feel like you're accomplishing things. With the other one, it just felt like such an uphill battle, while with this, like even just being able to mill out the Word Modbot with the script font on one of those little laminate tiles was a huge feeling of just accomplishment. Like, yes, I actually got this machine to do something, and it gets you pumped up wanting to explore what you can do more so with this machine. Like I mentioned at the beginning of this video, and clearly as I've explained throughout this, I am by no means a CNC expert. I am a complete novice with just a little bit of experience in the lingo and a tiny bit of experience using these machines. If there is a question that I did not answer, please let me know in the comments down below. If I can figure out the answer, I will let you know it. If I don't have the answer, the manufacturer has been really awesome at getting back to me on a regular basis, so I have no problem taking all the questions, reaching out to them, and letting you know in the comments down below. I'll also place links in the description to where you can find out more about this machine or purchase one for yourself if that is something you decide you want to do. And on that note, guys, this has been the FoxAlien 3018 SE CNC machine. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Again, please let me know what you think in the comments down below. I do plan on expanding and using some different technologies over the next year or two here, because As much as I love 3D printing and have a ton more to cover and will continue to cover, there's a lot of other really cool fabrication tools out there that I think you guys might be interested in. So on that note, don't forget to like and subscribe for more great videos. I make a video every single Saturday, so there is always fresh content coming your way. You guys absolutely blew up the last video on my experience running a 3D print farm. Thank you guys so much for the support, the feedback, the questions, the positive remarks. You guys absolutely rock. If you do want to support the channel furthermore, I'll place links down below to my Patreon, where there are some really cool rewards. And as always, huge shout out to my current Patreon supporters. You guys are absolutely awesome, and I really appreciate you guys allowing me to spend more time doing what I love, which is making content for you all. On that note, this has been Daniel from ModBot, and I look forward to seeing you guys in my next video. Peace, guys.